Hey everybody, so today I'm going to talk to you about a deception technique that I utilize. I don't actually have a name for this because it utilizes a couple of other techniques, but it is a very effective technique that I have found, and I found it useful across the US and across the world. And it takes advantage of your opponent's instincts by you pushing them down known pathways. Stay tuned and you'll find out. So the technique works just like so. You're facing against your opponent who is one of your typical mid-guard swordsmen, right? It's that opponent who likes to hold their sword approximately around waist height and fairly parallel to the ground. So, Lynn is my opponent. This particular technique involves me pushing her down a known pathway. All I'm going to do is I'm going to raise, and this is, again, from a low guard perspective, I'm going to raise my tip up and cross over the top of her sword. So what happens now is I'm going to raise my tip up past the level of her weapon and then cross my tip over the top of her sword. Once you are in that position, you are now ideally situated in order to perform the dive and the step. Now, the dive of your sword should happen just slightly before you actually move the body, but in all honesty, if you did both at the same time, you're still perfectly safe because of the fact that as your body's moving, this piece of steel that is your sword gets between you and your opponent. So again, I will rise my tip up, cross over the weapon, dive down, and step. Now, at this particular stage, she's going to have an instinctual desire to push back. Because I've pushed her sword out of the way, she will waste a small sliver of time pushing back on there, and that is effective communication that I'm going to use to my advantage. Because although our eyes are the slowest sense we possess, particularly when you're talking about the amount of time that fencing happens across, your sense of touch, however, is your fastest sense. So listen to it. When you feel that pressure come off of that blade, you will whip your sword up into a high parry position and drive it forward with a combined stringere straight into your opponent's body. You can take him to the head, whatever at that point in time, it's really dealer's choice. I have found this to be a very effective technique. Now, I will say this. I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight on this. This is not something you necessarily want to dive into without knowing a little something about your opponent. So if you have the opportunity to sort of feel out your opponent, right? Meaning, if I've got my opponent in front of me, and I do just this much of the technique, from a nice safe distance, just to see what my opponent's reaction is, well, if they go running away from you, you know that this isn't necessarily a technique for them. But if they are somebody who, as you dive down onto them, and then they come off of that and whip it up high, now you know this is the kind of person you want to demonstrate this against. And again, last time, tip rises up, crosses over the sword, you dive down and take a small step forward while pushing your opponent's weapon to the outside. When they come off of it, you whip up into a high parry position, strike forward against your opponent. It's very effective, highly deceptive, and I think you're going to find that with a little bit of practice, this is going to be one of your staple moves in the future.